I didn't come from any sort of privilege. I mean, I grew up opposite Grenfell Tower, where in West London, where the big fire was quite a few years ago. For me, it's always just been you work hard, you do your best, especially at poker events, just host great events day after day, week after week, and I never really thought about anything else. I just wanted to do a great job, basically, at what I was doing.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Burnt Chef Journal, hosted by myself, Chris Hall, the founder of the Burnt Chef Project. This week's guest is Andrew from Emilias Pasta. Andrew talks about his career as a professional poker player to running poker events and how he rekindled his childhood love for pasta by travelling around to learn more about pasta and how it's made, before opening 2 restaurants focused on providing the very best pasta. We talk about his views on mental health, well-being, starting businesses, and we talk quite a bit about social media and Andrew's views on that as well. So it's a slightly different chat to normal, and again, it's valuable to hear other people's views and opinions on such a wide subject matter. So I really hope that you enjoy this week's episode.
On the surface, we at Lamb Weston are a leading global frozen potato product provider, but hospitality is in our roots. We are helping to chip away the stigma of mental health in the industry and truly believe in well-being through potatoes, which is why we are in full support of the Burnt Chef Project. If you want to find out more about how we provide well-being through the humble potato, or try a free sample of our award-winning products, such as our proper British chips, the Dukes, follow us on Instagram at Lamb Weston UK.
I do have a few things to say about mental health in general and sort of just how I see some things and why I think some people do, and obviously that's not everybody, but I know some people who are especially high achievers have mental health problems because their sort of expectations do not sort of align with the reality of stuff, and I think for me, I know a lot of people who sort of really try to build business and do stuff, but they're not prepared to do the sacrifices and do the work. So naturally, they get very unhappy, and it goes into a bit of a. So that's just sort of the high achievers. Obviously, I understand, but a lot of other people have a lot of different issues. But I think personally, just on that note, I think there is a bit of a reverse stigma with founders and entrepreneurs. And whilst the journey is extraordinarily tough, and you go through hell and back many, many times during that process, in terms of in your head, in your body, in your sort of emotional state. For me, sort of as a founder, I have a deeper vision for things, and I sort of accept in myself that there's a price to pay for achieving, if I want to try and achieve great things, if that makes sense. For me, there's sort of always a risk reward with everything that comes to that. And so I think from a general level, I do believe there's a huge problem with mental health in hospitality and restaurants. But in the general sort of business world, I believe that, well, if you do want to build a multi-million-pound business and a business that changes things, there's going to be a cost to that. You're not just going to be able to live your life, see your friends 4 times a week, talk to your family, see them 4 times a day, like let's say other people who don't want to go on that journey, basically. So actually something I've been upset at is I think the media doesn't really differentiate stuff, is that yes, it is tough, but that's sort of what I signed up for, if that makes sense. And I think that's where it sort of differs between, I guess, mental health of, let's say, founders and similar people and mental health of employees, which I think is extremely important and often overlooked. But yeah, we can go onto that a bit more in other sections, basically.
I can see it's something that you're passionate about, so I'm interested to sort of probe that a little bit deeper, because having I mean, both of us are in situations where we're spinning plates and got a lot of things to juggle, and it's incredibly stressful and incredibly hard work. And I think that you're never necessarily resilient when you take on this challenge, but it's something you build and grow with.
Yeah, exactly. And I think some people build it and some people decide it's not for them, basically. But I think, yeah, definitely 100% agree. You don't know how tough you are until you go through it, basically. That's one of the key things, basically.
Yeah, 100%. And that's a nice little soundbite as well. But and then finally, I think already tapping in and listening to you, I think that there's a few bits in there. But, I'd like to try and inspire others, those who may be currently, whether they have a mental illness, whether they are, struggling in their job or with their life or goals, and really try and sort of just tap into any advice or any life lessons that you've learned along the way to inspire others. And, what you were saying about starting a business and the hard work and determination and grit that you need to do that. We get a lot of different demographics from all over the world listening to this, from students all the way through to, retirees. And I think it's important that one thing that I've learned over the last few years is that your potential is limitless. It's on, you can do whatever you want to do. You just need to apply yourself and be able to learn and invest time into yourself to do so.
Cool. And I think that the key thing with that is also, I think something that people forget is it is limitless, but provided you're prepared to sacrifice a lot to get there. And I think a lot of people think just hard work and determination gets you a very long way, and it does get you a certain way, but it's really sacrifice that gets you that extra part of it. And I think that's what a lot of people miss, and I think that's why some people in this day and age do get very, very upset with themselves or disappointed. It happens to me, it happens to all of us, I'm sure. But it depends on what you're prepared to give up to go after what you want, basically. So
yeah, true. Not too much personal sacrifice there. We don't want. I think that's that's where there's. We'll come on to this in more details because again, it's good content. I don't particularly want to.
I think definitely it's a good discussion. Yeah, definitely we can go on to it. I think there's varying views, and I guess from my perspective, I don't want to share. I'll share one perspective on it, another perspective. They're not all necessarily my own points of view, if that makes sense. But I do think that that there is an element in this day and age that things are misrepresented, misinterpreted by the media, and when young people have such an access from a young age to the media and what they say, I think it gets very misinterpreted, which in itself leads to a lot of the problems later down the line.
Unrealistic expectations. Yeah, it's yeah. I think we could we'll talk for a while, but just to begin with, then, just for those who perhaps aren't familiar with yourself, Andrew, can you just explain like a little bit about sort of your business and how you found your way into this particular industry? What inspired you to get to where you are now?
Yeah, definitely. I guess I'm 29 now. I started Emilias when I was about 25. Started a lot of the development work when I was about 23. And I basically, when I was 17, I wasn't actually going to go to college or university. I had a poker events business, which I was running quite successfully. And I just wanted to go and do my own business and keep running it. I was also, in addition to the business, I was a semi-professional poker player, did very well from that, basically. And I personally, I love studying academics, but I guess I was young. I was making some decent money for that age, and I didn't want to go. But fortunately, my parents sort of forced me to go nonetheless, and just told me to do it on the side. And I guess that was my first sort of entry into hospitality, was basically just running corporate, private, high stakes games across London. And basically, I was doing that throughout college and university. And then when I finished university, and as I was finishing, I was starting to work on just some other things that were interesting to me. And one of those things was I felt that throughout university, that pasta was extremely underrepresented in the UK. And where it was represented, be it in casual dining restaurants or high-end restaurants, I thought it was, I didn't think it was right. On the casual dining side, in the big chains of, maybe you remember sort of 5, 6, 7 years ago, I always felt that you're paying £10 to £13 for a pasta. They don't really care about the pasta; they care about the pizza and the meat dishes. So it was sort of a bit of a side thought, and it was most likely sort of either frozen or something similar along those lines in terms of as a dish. And then if you wanted a good pasta, you'd have to go a bit higher end, maybe pay upwards of 20, 25 pounds a bowl, and go to a higher end restaurant. And I felt, because I've loved pasta from when I was a little kid, and I used to actually play around with the shapes, my mum tells me. That's what she said to one of our investors when we were opening the first restaurant. I used to play as a kid. I used to sort of like to have different sauces with different shapes and see how they tasted, basically. So I can't remember too much of it myself when I was too little, but I do remember I did love it a lot, and I ordered pasta very frequently. And I think as I got to university and I moved out of home, it became increasingly difficult, basically, to get good pasta. And so for me, I felt that traditional, homemade, homely, comforting bowl of pasta that is just made of simple ingredients, it's nothing fancy, it's 100% natural, freshly made, I felt I could do that far better than anybody else was doing it at a very affordable price point. And that's where Emilias started. And I started traveling around Italy, doing research with chefs, couch surfing, staying in Airbnbs, doing lots and lots of basically things just to get under the skin of Italian culture and Italian food. Basically anybody and everybody who would talk to me, I would talk to them about what I want to do, and basically see if anyone has any advice or any suggestions or any places they think I should visit. And that was sort of me, out of university, just sort of couch surfing a bit, and just starting to develop the concept, basically. So that was the early days of Emilias, and then we did a bit of street food stuff. We were testing a few of the recipes. I wanted to get a bit of experience, and then I was quite fortunate. I obviously had done a lot of groundwork, about a year and a half of groundwork on the concept and the recipes and the vision, how I wanted to see it. And I basically, a few of my former clients of the poker business, I went to all of them, told them what I was doing, and a few of them decided to invest. So I didn't realize it at the time, but it was some of those regulars who I'd been doing events for I believe over 8 years, 7-8 years, come the time of when we were really looking to press go, had a few people like, you know what, you've got basically no restaurant experience, but we've got belief in you, and let's sort of give it a spin, see where you can take it, basically. So, and then we opened in St. Catherine Docks, and then that went extremely well. And then we've opened so St. Catherine Docks was in November 2016, and we opened a second restaurant in February 2019 in Aldgate, and that's sort of where we are today.
As an introduction goes, I think, Andrew, you've come in at the top spot to go from a semi-professional poker player to ending up with multiple businesses serving great quality pasta. I don't think I've ever heard a story quite like it. And so, like, do you have any Italian heritage? Is there anything specifically that made you think, well, pasta's the thing that I have to do in my life? Like,
no, it was just, I don't have Italian heritage. I'm actually, I'm born in London, but my mum is Russian, my dad's Scottish. So again, very, very mixed, quite a mixed background. So I have a lot of Western and Eastern European roots in me. And no, I don't have any Italian, but as I mentioned to you, it's something that I just saw, and it was just screaming at me. And I love the dish. And like I said, from when I went to university, I didn't feel very satisfied. So I felt that was sort of my problem to fix, if that makes sense.
I truly understand that. That's sort of how the Burnt Chef project was born, in a similar way, really. But so obviously you managed to get investors on board to be able to start that. Do you think that your sort of, I mean, I guess what I want to sort of try and find out, and for others who may have a similar sort of passion and want to try and do something similar, would you say that money and capital was going to be the key driver for that, or the fact that you had relationships and that you had a sort of a proven track record of determination and trying hard?
Yeah, I'd say in general, I mean, I didn't come from any sort of privilege. I mean, I grew up opposite Grenfell Tower, in West London, where the big fire was quite a few years ago. for me, it's always just been you work hard, you do your best, especially at poker events, just host great events day after day, week after week, and I never really thought about anything else. I just wanted to do a great job, basically, what I was doing. And I think capital is a big barrier, but I also think it's sort of rightly a big barrier because restaurants are a very, very difficult business. If you want to open a restaurant, you need a fair amount of money. I mean, these days it's a bit easier. You can prove your concept with pop-ups and stuff like market halls and other sort of street food type sort of food halls, if that makes sense. You've got market halls, guys like Mercato, and various other brands that are popping up, basically. And so they've basically made it far more accessible, which I think is great, just to prove your concept or just to showcase what you can do, basically. And so, yeah, I think capital used to be maybe a bigger barrier than it is now. I think now, if you create a great product, there's far easier ways to get into sort of the spotlight than it was maybe 5-10 years ago, basically.
That's incredible. And how many sites? Is it just the 2 sites you have now, or do you have more?
Yeah, just the 2 at the minute. Yeah.
And plans to grow, no doubt, from talking to you for a very brief period.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, we would like to, for me, the whole vision from the beginning has been we want to basically share comforting, fresh, affordable pasta to as many people as we can. And all our food is made 100% naturally. Everything is made on site, start to finish. And that's what we keep to as an ethos. For me, it's extremely important that the food is right. Because for me, just as we start touching maybe onto the mental health topic in a bit, what you eat has such a big impact on your body, on your mood, on your hormones, on your emotions, on everything, basically. And so for me, my mum, she's actually a doctor, and she's focused in natural medicines, basically. And we've at home, we've always baked our own bread, made everything start to finish, you know. And so for me, I want to share that with others because I realize how much of a positive impact it has on your body when you just eat good food, when you're eating constantly fried food, microwaved food, or dead food, as I call it. And dead food is basically food that is maybe created in a factory somewhere or genetically modified or and anything along those lines. Basically, that's dead food, and your body just over time is not going to react well to it. You might eat it today and tomorrow and 6 months time, and it'll be okay. But over time, your body will deteriorate if you eat a lot of those foods. And so for me, I wanted to create something that basically does good, essentially. And when people eat with us, I mean, the ultimate test for me was in the first two and a half years of when we opened. I worked every day in the restaurants from 8 a.m. till midnight, pretty much. I can't remember having any days off. And I ate our food every day. And so that was for me the biggest test after I went through that phase. I was like, that's that. I had that confidence. I'm like, A, I wasn't fed up of it personally. And B, I wasn't obese. I wasn't ill at the end of it, you know. I was actually very healthy still. So
it's interesting. So, it's interesting you should say that. Someone pointed me in the way of a BBC documentary over in the UK recently, and it was talking about the impacts that processed foods have on not just your overall well-being and your physical health, but they actually change your brain and they limit the neuroplasticity of it. And I think I haven't had a chance to watch it yet, but they were saying that actually this chap who went on this processed food diet of eating as much of it as possible actually found that his brain didn't change back to the way it was before he started this diet. I don't know if you'd seen that at all.
No, I haven't actually seen it, and I think I should know. I'm not a qualified doctor or a medical professional, so all I'm saying is just my own observations, just from what my mum has sort of shown me over the last sort of nearly 30 years, and B, over what people I see around me. And I think a huge part of the reason why we see gluten intolerances increasing dramatically over the last 5-10 years has been because people's guts are getting ruined, basically. And there's only one way your gut gets ruined, and it's what you intake into your body. So I don't think it takes a rocket scientist to figure it out. And if you just look at that's just one example, gluten intolerances are heavily to do with, yes, it's to do with stress and other bits and pieces, but your gut in general is hugely influenced by the food you put into it, basically. So yeah, I think in general that's a huge element, basically, of it for me is we want to spread good food, basically, good food that's alive and not dead food.
That's impressive. I mean, I think for those who are interested, 90% of your serotonin, your feel good happy hormone, or one of your feel good happy hormones, is actually produced in your stomach. So
I didn't know that, actually.
Did you not? It's
very interesting. It's very interesting.
Yeah, there's more nerve endings in your stomach than most parts of your body, and the general serotonin feel good factor is produced through, I mean, you get it released as a result of exercise. But this is why, like, when I'm a big believer now in gut instinct. Ever since I had my own, one of my mental illnesses or mental experiences when I was in my late 20s, I went after a voyage of self-discovery for a couple of years. I had like this gut instinct, and I stopped ignoring it and started following it. And ever since then, things have just started to snowball and work. And I'm a big believer that your gut has evolved over thousands and thousands of years. It knows more than your brain does in some ways, shape, or form, and it's actually responsible for a lot of how you live your life on a daily basis in terms of your how you're feeling and how, as you say, how your physical and mental health performs.
Yeah. 100% agree, and I think it's often overlooked by a lot of people, basically, and a lot of people don't. They look at stuff like their social media usage, they look at various other things, but they don't actually look at the fact that they're drinking 5 Cokes every day and having some other artificial sweet stuff and some fried food 5 times a week, for example. I mean, you add all those things up and you can see why, even without looking at other elements of people's lives, you can see why gluten intolerance, gluten, but just lactose intolerances are increasing, and various other intolerances also. So,
see, and pasta isn't my strong point. Like, you talk to me about fine dining ingredients, I'm probably well aware. But when I think of pasta and I think of living off of pasta or eating it on a regular basis, whilst also putting my body through sort of 7 days of work on a weekly basis as well, I automatically think I'm going to end up, rather rotund and a little bit larger. So, what is it about freshly made pasta that, is it just the amount that you're eating in terms of being in the calorie deficit, or is it something about freshly made pasta that perhaps isn't as carb heavy or as reacts to your body in the way that perhaps pre-made pasta does?
So I think it goes back to quite simply, is it good food or bad food? Is it dead food or alive food? And if you make something freshly, whether it's bread or pasta, freshly every morning without adding anything unnatural into it, it's going to be good for you. For some people might have certain, everyone's body is a bit different. So somebody can eat more pasta and someone can eat a bit less. So yes, some people are more sensitive to bloating and other bits and pieces, and that all depends on your gut. But I would say in general, anything that's freshly made, basically is without anything unnatural, is going to be good for you. And I'm not saying you should stuff down like I did every day for 2 years, have loads of pasta. But everybody needs to have a balanced diet. And so good pasta and good carbs should form a part of everybody's diets, basically, unless of course you have intolerances or similar things.
And so it brings me on to, obviously you've got a team that work with you now. You've got managers and front of house and back of house staff. I mean, how has that been? From running events. I mean, I guess you're used to the planning and the experience of going through and putting on events for people, making sure that everything's organized. But how has it been, sort of being a restaurateur and dealing with the challenges that hospitality has to offer?
Yeah, so I mean, this has been a completely different ballgame. I mean, in events, you sort of have a few events and you have breaks in between to plan for them. A restaurant is like a theatre that never stops, basically. And I'd say that's the key difference. It runs 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, basically, from if you count when deliveries start coming in the mornings to when you close up in the evenings. I mean, our sites are probably in operation the best part of about maybe 16, 18 hours a day. So it's a non-stop operation, and that has enormous challenges compared to, let's say, events where you have that. So yeah, I wouldn't. I was talking to actually a friend the other day just about, and they were just telling me themselves. They were like, the actual toughness, if you think about restaurants, is you basically have to deliver something in perfect time, in perfect quality, in the perfect way, with a smile on your face every single time. And there's not too many and that's why I call it like a sort of 24-hour theatre. Most jobs will not have that, if that makes sense. You don't have customer after customer. They order their food, they need it in 7 minutes, otherwise they're going to be unhappy. So there's very few industries, and I think that's the biggest. That's the toughest part of restaurants is that constant. It doesn't stop, basically.
Yeah. It's that. Yeah, there's a strong expectation, not to mention the time pressures involved, plus also the fact that, I guess I've not owned a restaurant business before, but I know that operating margins can be quite slim. So you almost have to be open for that period of time in some cases to be able to turn over a profit. Or would you say, because we are starting to see now with this resource crisis, we're seeing less and less people in the industry, and we're just about to publish a study with regards to that and the data from that. But we are starting to see businesses now operating, they're cutting out lunch services or they're cutting back on the amount of days that they're able to perform. Is that something that you've had to do, or have you been quite sort of lucky with regards to keeping hold of all your team?
So, I mean, in general, I think, I don't know if you call it fortunate, there's probably an element of luck in everything. But we kept everybody, basically, we kept our whole team throughout the whole pandemic. And we paid, I think a common myth from just the general, in the general sort of mainstream media is that furlough is this great thing and it's free, basically, and it keeps employees on. The number one thing that we should note is that about, I'd say, 30% of restaurant staff's salary is made up of either trunk or tips, which was excluded from furlough. And so we've had to top up basically some of our staff's wages over the course of the whole pandemic. And for us, we see our teams as a bit more like our extended families. I dedicate vast portions of my life to Emilias, and it is for me an extended family, and we want to have a culture where people are treated in that way. And for us, that meant sort of putting our hands in our pockets a bit during the pandemic. And we basically, we didn't let go of anybody. There were a couple of people who went back home and voluntarily said that they're not sure if they'll come back. But I think there was some maybe Brexit sort of effects coming into there as well, basically. So just two events at the same time that has pushed people away. But in general, no. I mean, we kept our whole team, and we did our best for them, and obviously some people decided to leave themselves. Some people went on to other careers, but in general, we did our best to keep our team, basically. And we did have to hire a few more people when we reopen now. But I think that's just naturally part of restaurants, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And it's good to hear. I use the term lucky, and in fact, that's quite a derogative term. I think that, if you've got the right business setup, you've got the right culture within your organization as well, then it makes it easier for people to decide to come back and work, as opposed to, perhaps an environment where you don't feel like you're listened to, or that you enjoying the work perhaps as much as you could have done in another environment. So, I mean, what sort of key things do you think that Emilias has introduced to that, besides the furlough aspect, which is, a great thing to hear? What sort of things have you implemented?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Just before we go on to this, I'll just finish up. Yeah. So what I meant to say is the biggest misconception is that furlough is free, and it was for the first few months, but after that, each employer has to pay the national insurance and the pension contributions to each employee for every month they stay. And that works out to between £50 and £150 a month per employee. So for us, for example, a team of about 30 people, that's about £3,000 a month to keep people on furlough. And I think that's a big misconception that, I don't know if it's the media or the government or it's just a general thing that people are not aware of. But I think that people didn't realize that. I think people just thought furlough is there and it's all good, basically. Lockdowns are all fine. Everyone's being supported. But it did cost us a lot, to have furlough and to keep people. With regards to your other question on just what have we done or what are we doing, I would say we haven't really done anything specific since COVID hit, but we have some principles that we have from pre-COVID that I think have carried through and have potentially maybe further differentiated us from other restaurant businesses. Number one is we always pay a fair and what we think is an equitable wage. We don't pay what we think is the minimum possible. We pay what we think is a fair wage for that job. And so that is always at the living wage, basically. And so that's one thing that we've done and always done. For me, that's always been important. I personally don't believe that, say, a kitchen porter who really scrubs dishes and does a really tough job. I should note a disclaimer. When we first opened Emilias, myself and my mum were kitchen porters for many, many weeks at the restaurant. So I know exactly what they go through and basically what the job entails. And so for me, I never felt that was a job that was just, it requires no skill. For me, the kitchen porter is sort of the nuts and bolts to the operation. And when you don't have one, you realize how valuable they are, basically. So for me, it's looking at everything fairly. I think that's important in terms of salaries. Number two is the right culture at the company. I think everybody uses the word culture, but I think as COVID hit, I mean, especially as I saw amongst my friends, you could see what companies had good cultures literally a month after it happened, because there were some people who were so happy not to be in offices and to be at home, which I think tells you how toxic or how bad the culture was at their company. And there were some people who missed their workplace so much. And those were very few, but there were some of those people, again, from my friends. And for me, that's what, when COVID hit, we just saw black and white, where you've got good culture and where you don't, basically. Because where you've got a good culture, people want to come back to it. It's not to say they want to be there 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, but people want to come to work because they enjoy the people, they enjoy the work, they enjoy the general environment. And for us, we've always had that as something extremely close to our hearts. And like I said, I'm very hands-on in the business. Our operations director is also hands-on. So we're in the restaurants all the time. And so we want a good environment there. We want it for them. We want it for everybody, basically. So
it's amazing to hear. And you are right. There was an extremely strong spotlight effect. COVID had this ability to be able to put everything into a perspective for a brief period of time. And it was like a paradigm shift. So a perception tilt whereby, for those who perhaps aren't familiar with the term, is all of a sudden you can see things from a third person perspective and it completely changes your view. And you get it from near-death experiences or from major events in your life. And COVID happened to everyone at the same time. And I was a byproduct of that as well. I had a good job as a sales manager, working for a great company, but COVID hit and all of a sudden it made you reassess what was important to you. And for me, I lost half of my income was commission and I lost all of that and was on an 80% furlough. And I suddenly realized that actually, whilst money was important, I'd taken about a 20K a year pay cut straight off the bat. And I wasn't any less happier. I was financially a lot stricter. I had to be, had to cut back on everything, but it didn't make me any less happier. And that for me was a big aha moment. And I thought, you know what? I need to be spending time doing something that fulfills me rather than, making loads of money. And I'm sure others, I mean, I've got friends out there who suddenly started businesses and their passion projects. And it's been very interesting to see the results of COVID. And that's talking from a positive point of view. Because I know we tend to go on about it as, this big dark thing that has caused a lot of impact in terms of health and finances, but there are some positives to come out of it as well.
Yeah, definitely. There's a silver lining, and everybody got a chance to reassess their lives. And I don't know maybe how many other times in our lives we're going to have that without something happening personally to somebody, if that makes sense.
100%. So, I mean, it leads me quite nicely onto the subject of like what mental health means to you, both from a personal standpoint of view and also a restaurateur.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I have different sort of ways I see mental health. I mean, I think I'm quite fortunate in that I sort of grew up in the generation of this, you could say generation, I think Z, I don't know which one specifically, whether it's the boomers or Generation Z or which one it is. But I grew up in the generation when all this technology and social media started sort of coming into our lives in a big way, basically. So I think it's probably a bit easier for me maybe than others who are a lot older, more experienced, to understand basically mental health from a sort of young person's perspective. But in general, I mean, I think it's a huge topic, so it's hard to give a more general view. But I think in general, I mean, it's become a lot tougher to live for young people for a variety of reasons. I think if you look at, let's say, people growing up 20, 30 years ago, your distractions were alcohol, booze, cigarettes, I don't know, women, other bits and pieces, the usual stuff, While in this day and age, we're growing up, and especially the kids now who are sort of 12, 13, 15, 18 years old, they're growing up in an age where they have all these added distractions of social media, digital this, digital that, and it's sort of being created in such a way that it's destructive to your brain. And so I'd say it's much tougher to live these days. And again, I can't say I lived 20, 30 years ago to compare accurately, but just looking at what people say is these added distractions are not just distractions. Social media is a drug. I mean, there's no other way to see it. It's addictive. It's the same as coffee or cigarettes or alcohol, like I said, it manipulates your brain in a way that makes it the same way a drug would, It's just it's legal, whilst most drugs are not. So, yeah, I think in general, I think that factor has severely affected mental health for young people and made it a lot tougher to grow up, I guess, in a more healthy way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, social media has had a big impact, both positively and negatively over the years. And I when I think back about my earliest experiences of having a mobile phone and social media, I have to be honest, for me personally, I'm always, when I think back, I get flashbacks to like my heart racing when you get a text message, and that buzz of someone texting you, and you keep checking your phone to make sure that you haven't missed something. And I guess even from then, even before the age of social media, the old Motorola's with the unscrewy, like the bricks, you were already being programmed to expect something rather than living in the here and now. So I do think it's not conducive to good mental well-being if it's become part of your daily ritual to check it 60 or 70 times. But it is also designed to captivate you. My daughters at the moment are now, one of them's playing a game on her tablet called Roblox, and she just spends all this time chatting with other people in a virtual world. And you just think, like, it's not mentally healthy. And we limit her time with that, and we try and get her away from it. But ultimately, if you restrict her completely from doing it, then she's not living with her generation, and then she's not getting involved, and she's been ostracized. So it's a really strange situation, and I'm sure that at some stage it's going to turn on its head as well. I think
Yeah, definitely. I think the fact we haven't seen any government. I think what's interesting is if you see we see government regulation coming in and stuff like allergies, calorie counting, sugar content, and stuff like this, which I agree is needed and probably is 10 years too late. But if you look at social media and technology, a lot of this stuff has been around for over 15, 20 years, and it's just extraordinary that this stuff manipulates your brain very often in not a positive way, but there hasn't been government regulation that deals with this directly. I mean, if you look at stuff like stuff that does bad for you, there's usually a restriction or an age limit. You can only start drinking when you're 18 or something, you know? And it's just extraordinary, in my opinion, that, and I think that's why we have this mental health crisis now, is potentially, I mean, not to criticize the government, but just to sort of put it quite lightly, is you've got something that harms people's brains and development. It has to be regulated by the government in some way, shape or form. And it cannot just be a free for all. These companies create whatever mechanisms or things they want to engage us and to increase our screen time at no cost, basically. Sorry, at any cost to them. And that's how it's been so far. It's been, they've done anything and everything to keep us glued, to keep our attention on their platforms, and irrespective of the cost it has to us, in terms of mental health and brain health and everything else. So.
Yeah, and it's we were looking when we train a lot of colleges on the subject of mental health and stress, just to give them a bit of an entry level understanding of it, because one thing that I wanted to address when I started this was that no one had ever sat down with me at college level and explained what depression was or anxiety was, or the relationship of poor diet and poor sleep on your health. And one of the stats I pulled out on the infographics I use is it's a time span, and it shows you how much of a proportion of a young adult's life is spent on social media. And it's something ridiculous, like 4 years of someone's life is spent now on social media, when I think the average was about 7 to 8 years is spent on sleep. So people spend more time now on social media consuming that content than they do actually, you know, most other things like eating, for example. You know, it's a very scary figure.
Wow, that's it. Is that so? That's up to the age of 18, 4 years.
No, it's on average over the course of a lifetime. It would be so on a course of, say, between 60 to 80 years. But you know, and these are figures based now. This is without any developments over the next 10 to 15 years of things that might be able to
It's going to be a lot bigger than that. I wouldn't be surprised if it was 20% of your life or a quarter of your life is spent on your screen or on social media, basically. By the time this next generation grows up, basically.
Yeah, but it's interesting now that they've built the well-being tools on the phone, haven't they? So you can actually see what your screen time is over the course of the day. And sometimes I look at it and it's like 3.5 hours, and you think, what could I have achieved in 3.5 hours that didn't involve being on the phone, or what have I missed in life? And what about from a professional standpoint of view? Like what has, you know, you've got a team under you now that work in quite a fast-paced environment. As you say, it's open sort of 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. How has your sort of consideration of mental health and well-being been for your team members?
So I think in general, I mean, I don't like to label it as we're looking after your mental health, because I think for a lot of people it makes them feel inferior. For me, I prefer just to set up good habits or systems in our restaurants to make people feel good, you know. And I find that when people have good habits, they want to continue those good habits. And so, in general, what we like to do is we like to have a cap on the working hours that people can work. We have caps on the number of shifts people can do back to back. We encourage everybody during their breaks to go outside, because near our restaurants we actually have really nice little parks and green areas. So we always encourage that, just to get away from stuff, just to relax a bit. But in general, I think the tough thing is that what we try to do is we're not there to overstep the boundary, if that makes sense. At the end of the day, every human has their own choices as to how they want to live their lives. And whether or not that's detrimental to them is their choice. And we can only sort of let them know what we think is best practice or what is a bad habit, and it's up to them, basically. I think that employers do have a responsibility, and we take that quite seriously in terms of people's well-being. For me, I care more about what I like to say to our teams is, I want them to be happy, because at the end of the day, majority of people in this world spend over 50% of their lives at work. So if you're not happy at work, or you're not happy in general, you probably shouldn't be here. And so that's the first thing. We just like to encourage people to be happy, whether that's going on holidays, spending time with their families or friends, or not overworking them. We try to just take quite a tailored approach, and I think it's definitely a lot easier in a smaller company, because we've got about, I think, six line managers in the company, and so it's a lot easier because we talk to them daily, basically. But I think it's when you get to bigger organizations and you start to have people who, again, are not happy at work and their management level, that starts to breed a toxic or negative environment, because they're not happy. They don't care about others' happiness. And that essentially just breeds unhappiness. And so what we try and encourage is, for me, I'm like, if you're happy at work, you're going to do a good job probably, and you're going to enjoy your life. And I don't want to hold anyone at Emilias who doesn't want to be there, basically. And I think that we're just quite open about that always with people. And we're like, sometimes people have been with us a year and they say, you know what, I think it might be time for me to move on, and we're always accepting of that. And then some people say they want to come back afterwards. They go do some stuff elsewhere and they're like, actually, loved it here, I want to come back, And so we actually find our teams is that people who, let's say, who have left, they still come back every few months just to spend half a day and see how everyone's doing. So we like to have a culture where sort of everyone is, you could almost say, friends at work, basically, and everybody is generally just try to hire good people who work hard, who want to be part of Emilias and the journey, basically.
It's good to hear. And what about yourself as well? I mean, obviously, from the sound of things, you're not a man who's scared of a bit of hard work and hard graft, and to build an events business when you are, when a lot of us are still trying to figure out what to do with our lives, and starting a restaurant and working multiple days. Yeah. How do you keep yourself firing on all cylinders at top performance?
Well, for me, I think I just try and understand what I need as a person. So I have quite strict routines. For me, I understand I need to have good sleep. I'm a big sports person, so I play tennis, football, and do swimming once a week. So all three things every week. And for me, I know that so long as I get good rest, surround myself with good people who are happy and who want to be here, so to speak, and I keep my own routine in check, I'll be happy, because I love what I do. So that's my sort of I don't think there's a secret. I think the secret is the toughness. The toughness is it's actually quite simple if you think about it. If you take away everything, all the distractions away from your life, it's quite simple. If you have good relationships and you do work that you love, and in general you have good habits in your life, or you don't wake up and spend 3 hours on social media and then have a Coke and then have a chocolate and then, do you know what I mean? That's never going to lead to a happy and healthy life, And this is where I think the sort of, there's a bit of a delicate line with mental health, and I think the key thing is educating people on habits and what's good for you and what's not. But at the end of the day, if somebody wants to then not follow that, that's up to them. But then for them to then complain and say I'm suffering, I think it's tough. I understand everybody has different lives and things are not always easy. But in general, if you're guided and you have that guidance, which I think a lot of people don't, I think that's one of the biggest problems is the education, having a mentor, having guidance, having good influences. That's sort of the key to it. And I think, again, if you're going back to that, mental health is not, in my opinion, the government telling people, educating them to say you could have anxiety, you could have this. It's about saying, well, actually forget about that, but let's encourage everyone to sleep well, let's encourage everyone to intake, good foods. Let's not encourage companies who are manufacturing food that's completely destroying your body, These are all the things that ultimately let's regulate the drug of social media, and let's regulate it in a way so that, like you said, the positives outweigh the negatives. Because for me, I think for the vast majority of the population, the negatives outweigh the positives at the minute, because it's completely unrestricted and it's made to be very addictive. And at the end of the day, I think these are the things that need to happen in order for people to improve their mental health. I think you can educate people all you want, but at the end of the day, if they've got that distraction on their phone 30 times a day, they're going to be glued to their phone the whole day, you know? Unfortunately, that's the way they've programmed it, you know? And I think it almost makes it a bit worse when you sort of know you have anxiety, for example, but you don't know how to deal with it, right? I think that's even worse, is when you're stuck in that cycle of you just don't know how to deal with it because you haven't been educated, you haven't been told what the problems could be. So I think that's the root problem of the mental health crisis at the minute. Is there's a lack of government guidance and government regulation on various aspects of things, and I think there should be a huge amount. I mean, as an example, I mean, one of the most important factors in terms of not having serious effects from COVID has been being healthy, right? So again, in my opinion, it's a perfect time that education is brought there, you know, and that's also what we try and do a bit. We try to, through ourselves and our managers, we try and just talk about it and just talk about what are good habits, what are habits that maybe you do but you don't realize are bad for you, you know. And I think that's what we do. But I think the government and hopefully guys like your organization will hopefully focus on that and actually tell people, because a lot of people I know social media is bad for them, but they have no idea how to limit it or control it, or how to build habits that, for example, take away your addictiveness to it. You know, they don't realize that actually if you put your phone away for 3 hours and you just spend some time with your friends kicking a football around, actually for that day in general, your mental health improves drastically. And then the next day, you're not so addicted to your phone, if that makes sense, you know? And I think, again, it's these small habits that will influence. If people are educated about that, that's what will ultimately, I think, will change young people's mental health. At the minute, all they read about is X number of 30% of whatever people under the age of 18 suffer from anxiety or depression. And people read that and they're like, yeah, that's me. But then they have no idea what to do about it. And I think that's the biggest problem, because you're in that vicious cycle where you know something's wrong, but you don't know what to do about it. You're scrolling on social media, getting your Deliveroo, instant this, instant that. And you're not actually, someone never explained to you in life that actually when you, go to the shop, you get fresh air, you see other humans, all of these small things contribute to your well-being. And I think a lot of people don't recognize all of those small things. And every human will have about 100 or 200 of those things a day. And if you miss half of them, or unfortunately, that is a big problem, basically.
Are you familiar with the can-do? I guess the correct terminology is method or acronym. Can-do?
No, I'm not. No.
So can-do is, and it's something that we taught to, again, students and people that we taught to during our training modules. But can-do is about spending an hour a day doing can-do, and can-do is communicate, activity, be nice and kind to people, discover and learn new skills, learn about yourself, learn a new hobby, and observe. And so if you try and put, if you do 20 minutes of worth of activity a day, you're nice to someone for 5 minutes of the day, you spend 15 minutes a day learning a new skill or developing a new dish or doing something that's creative, and then you spend 10, 15 minutes at the end of the day observing, being mindful, living in the present, here and now, then all of those things, if you build that into your daily ritual, can actually be conducive to improving your overall well-being, because they're all things that are, extremely important. Nutrition is the only thing that's missed off of there, but nice nutrition, you could put that in, but it's a really simple way of starting to build a framework where actually you can start to perhaps change some things in life that might have led you down that path in the first place.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great framework, and it sounds like it's very simple and to the point, and that people can follow basically. So yeah, I think that sort of stuff is brilliant, and hopefully will help people.
Yeah, definitely. As you said, like, education is key. Like, a lot of people don't know enough about this subject. I only learned about it through the last 2 years of doing what I do. So, this is why we provide things like the Burnt Chef Academy for free. And we're building a nutritionist course on there at the moment. We're building one about sleep and one about mindful drinking and all of these other subjects that we just take for granted, but actually are conducive to, if we're more educated about it, then we're able to spot, stop, and swap, certain behaviors.
But I think, again, one of the root problems, unfortunately, it is to do with the brain. And I don't know how familiar you are with just, if you take drugs on a regular basis, your brain changes basically, and the chemicals in your brain change. The actual sort of matter or the mass in your brain changes a bit, and ultimately, if somebody's being a drug addict, i.e. they've been addicted to social media for many months, it's very hard to get them out of that. It's the same sort of rehabilitation process that you would go through historically if somebody had an addiction to cocaine or something. And that's where I think in that this has created an epidemic of sort of drugs, but not physical drugs, digital drugs, for everybody. And I think it needs a much bigger response, because if you look at the amount of ways we have of treating drug addictions in reality, from helplines to rehab centers to education to resources, it's very different for a social media addiction, which I think is the biggest problem of the generation.
One of the things that resonates with me about that, and addiction specifically, was I was at a talk with Russell Brand a couple of years back, and he's obviously he's well known as being an ex-heroin addict, and he's gone through the 12 steps now. But he's rewritten the 12 steps, which resonated with me beautifully. And the first step was like, talking about higher powers and resigning yourself to the fact that there's a problem. He's like, are you a bit fucked? And do you need to unfuck yourself? If so, like, are you in a position right now where you can actually say, actually, yeah, I think I'm a bit fucked, whether it be social media, drugs, relationships, whatever it might be. Then the second thing is like, okay, so you are a bit fucked. What are you going to do to unfuck yourself? And then it goes on. But like the fourth step of that was quite powerful, and it was an inventory process. So it's a case of, you write down your action. You write down how it makes you feel, how it could potentially make others feel, and what you might be missing as a result of that, and what you can do to change that behavior. And you start rather cathartically, like journaling, you write it down. So it's like, oh, when I saw this person, I felt the need to go on my phone as a distraction. I felt this because I wasn't confident, or I didn't feel like I was on the same level as that individual. But actually, there's no difference, I'm still a human being, blah, blah, blah. And you start to actually identify those thought processes. So with addiction, it's really, really useful. And it's, I urge anyone to go and check that out. It does take hard work, but I think, like most addictions.
I think the key thing with that process is somebody has to want to do it. And they have to have got to 2 steps before that. They have to A, acknowledge they've got a problem, and then B, they have to want to solve it. I think the problem with most people is, their problem, but the problem, let's say, when you do have an addiction that is put upon you and you get into it, is that essentially there's a problem and you want to solve it. You don't know where to start, but some people also don't want to solve it. They just want to say they've got a problem and that's it, And so I think it takes time to get from recognizing the problem then to wanting to solve it. And often that's after quite a detrimental period. So.
Yeah, I mean, one of our ambassadors has spoken quite openly, Adam Simmons, about his experiences with addiction and the framework that he has had to build around his life to be able to deal with that. And it's a long and It's an arduous road, but ultimately he had hit rock bottom, and that's the reason why he had started to explore it as a subject matter. But yeah, again, this is why the Burnt Chef Project have put in place things like the Burnt Chef Support Service, which is, a free text-based service whereby even at 3 o'clock in the morning, if you're at home and you're feeling lonely, or you are experiencing an addiction or any other matter for that matter, you can text someone and get a response within a few minutes, so that you're not alone in that moment of need. And hopefully that just in itself will gently encourage you to well, we'll signpost you.
That's a great sort of first step to start helping people out, basically.
And we're extending that as well. So we're going to be offering some free counselling off of the back of that, free half-an-hour cognitive behavioural therapy, and a whole host of other services, kindly sort of in partnership with the Drinks Trust. So we've covered quite a lot of topics during this conversation. I guess for me, like the sort of key takeaways for this is that you have to work hard to be able to achieve great things, but also at the same time, everything's is an equal balance, everything in moderation and equilibrium. And also, you are effectively what you eat as well, which is what our mothers always told us, and we were like, yeah, fine. But it's a very, very true thing. I mean, was there anything else in particular that you felt that people should hear?
Yeah, no, I think just as a final stage, I mean, you mentioned that there are people obviously who are listening who might be thinking about starting their own business or doing stuff like that. And I just wanted to sort of revisit one of the previous points, is that if you are looking to achieve a disproportionate level of success, then you have to be prepared to go through a disproportionate amount of pain or sacrifice. And I think that's one topic that's often overlooked, just in general, because I think mental health is very important. And I know founders, including myself and others, probably don't have the best mental health at all times, just because of all the emotional roller coasters we're going on all the time. But that's in pursuit of a bigger vision, if that makes sense. And that's a voluntary choice I make. It's not something that somebody has forced me to do. And I think I think one thing that I think is important is if you do want to try and achieve a disproportionate level of success, be prepared for the pain that goes with it, and also for having to deal with it. And it becomes even harder to balance and to keep your mental health in shape when you're trying to achieve something disproportionately, let's say, larger than just the average, basically. And I think that's sometimes overlooked, because especially in recent times, we've seen a lot of media coverage about, I think there was a tennis player who was quite a famous female tennis player suffering from mental health. There's quite a few founders of big tech companies that have been quite in the media about it. And I think it's good they raise awareness of it, because maybe people weren't talking about it previously. But I also think on the flip side, these people are achieving an extreme disproportionate level of success, whether financially or fame-wise or in other ways. So there is a benefit to it for them, if that makes sense. And they've consciously or sometimes unconsciously made that choice to sacrifice that in return for that, basically. And so I think everybody creates their own balance. And so that's why for me, myself, I think I'm not too much of a believer of sort of crying and whining about my own mental health, because essentially I've picked the journey I want to take. I've voluntarily chosen where I want to work, what I want to do. And it's like there's a lot of people in finance. They have to work very long hours, and it's very stressful and it's very strenuous, because you're there weekends and weeks, but then you also get a very disproportionate compensation for that. And that's sort of how the world works, if that makes sense. If they didn't want you to, do you know what I mean? I mean, nothing comes for free in this world, right? So
yeah, I think and a lot of
and that's what I think. Just to summarize, I think that's what needs to be differentiated, is the mental health of those people who have voluntarily picked a path to go down that they know is going to be stressful, that holds immense rewards at the end of the journey. They've picked that very voluntarily. I think it's very different, let's say, to the mental health of a 15-year-old kid who basically phones have just been put in front of them and they've become addicted to social media. And as a result of that, their mental health is struggling. And that's what I want to differentiate, is that one is a voluntary choice that you've gone down. And yes, I don't disagree. I'm sure it's very tough as a founder or as anybody who's trying to achieve a lot. But it's a very different situation, because I voluntarily picked to become a founder and to go through that stress, whilst a 12-year-old child hasn't. It's consciously or with an adult mind picked that decision, and they've become addicted, and their mental health has suffered without them even realizing it, basically. And so I think that's just the two subtle differences, because again, I believe the media puts it all into one big basket. And I believe the focus should be on the ones who is not their fault, basically.
I understand where you're coming from. I don't particularly always agree with all the points in
okay.
Okay,
no, fair enough.
And it's a matter. I think it's a matter of points of view. And you know what? That's your point of view, and that works well for yourself. I know, being a founder of a rapidly growing non-profit, that my mental health, I experienced difficulty as well. And yes, this is the path that I've chosen, but I think that there are certain people out there who perhaps are experiencing difficulties with their mental health, who have set upon themselves whether that's starting a business or achieving accolades, that perhaps feel that whilst their intentions were quite clear to begin with about getting those goals, ultimately they've lost control over that at some stage, and now they've become a slave to it. So I think, just to say that everyone, it's your choice.
Oh, definitely. I totally agree with you. So I didn't mean to have a so incompetent statement. Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. Like I said, it can happen, and you don't realize it, and then and you, like you said, you become a slave to it. So.
Yeah, I think it's horses for courses. Each individual case is, people are unique. Everyone's unique. Whilst we're built the same as carbon-based life forms, we have our own, unique challenges. And I think that no one mental illness is the same as another. It's unique to each individual as well, and
exactly.
They occur for completely different reasons. I talk a lot about the human Givens approach, which is quite a holistic approach to mental illness, in terms of the fact that they believe that mental illness is predominantly produced by your environment and situations that have happened in your life, such as childhood trauma, such as your lack of control, lack of being out in the environment, all of these sort of these aspects. But it's also important to realize as well that and important to mention that not all mental illnesses are as a result of that. Some are, chemically and biologically driven. So it's very, very unique.
No, I definitely agree. I think that's probably the most important point is that a lot of us are not to blame for our own stuff. It's how we've grown up. It's sort of who our parents were, how they brought us up, And yeah, I totally agree. I think that is just going on to my previous point. I guess I just try to give a bit of a framework for the sort of high intensity life type thing. But I do agree, if you've had a bad environment growing up, then that will affect you no matter what you try and do in your later life, basically.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly did with me. I learned some things at an early age that did impact me in terms of my mental well-being. So, and then that carried on through with me until my late 20s, really. As a final sort of question for you, like if you were to sort of go back in time, meet your 16-year-old self, and give yourself some advice, what sort of advice would you give yourself, if any?
I mean, it's an interesting question. I'd say probably a couple of things. I would say one, it's important who you get your advice and your guidance from. That's extremely important. I always tell people, don't get business advice from someone who hasn't started a business, and don't get marriage advice from someone who's divorced, But the general point is that there's a lot of people giving advice to everyone about everything, but most of us don't really know much about life ourselves, let alone giving advice to others. So number one is who look very carefully to who you look up to for advice and guidance. And I think number two is be more confident in yourself and to avoid distractions. I think that's one of the harder things that the young people now are growing up with, and just being able to avoid. People always want things, and apps want your attention, and people want your attention, and parents want your attention. Everybody always wants your attention, basically, and being able to manage that, I think is very crucial to being happy, basically. So
it's a key thing, I think. I like that. Being able to say no, which isn't something that we're taught with, really, are we?
Yeah, and I think actually, to be honest, that's what is. Again, I know a lot of in mental health sort of charities. I spoke to one previously at my college, basically, and they always say learn to say no. And whilst I think to a person who thinks well and has a well-wired brain, that's a good piece of advice. I think to tell someone who's, let's say, been manipulated by their parents or their friends to say no is extremely difficult, and I don't think they get it. Do you know what I mean? Because for them, saying no means I'm going to go and get into more trouble and more trauma because of it, basically. And so, yeah, like I said, I think, again, it depends. But in general, I think the advice is correct. But I think for people who need that advice, I think that advice often can cause more problems than it can create solutions, basically.
Yeah, it backs you into a corner, doesn't it? I think I've been there, and I think a lot of people will resonate with that. It's sometimes easier said than done, especially when you feel like you've got no control over that situation. But being able to, I think the key thing.
Yeah, exactly. So if you have no control over the situation, as you said, for you to say no is like, that's I mean, that's tough. You're never going to do that, you know?
Yeah, true. But I think also at the same time, I think you can, if you feel strongly about something and you do believe, again, talking about gut instinct, something doesn't feel right, then you can draw the line in the sand, and you can almost determine how you choose to respond to those situations. Irrespective of what that might be. I think that sometimes, like for example, in a stressful situation, you could choose to completely and utterly lose your head, and you could be aggressive, or you could become withdrawn, or you could choose to look at it from a pragmatic outlook and look at it as the situation, as a moment in time that will pass, and then we can move on, or as a problem to solve with with tenacity. So I think it's all about, again, perceptions. But I think that if you can look at a problem like that, and you can say no, not necessarily verbally, but you can say no to how you might react to that, I think is a key thing. But again, that's not something we're taught. It's something we have to learn and develop as a skill set. And it takes time. It takes time. But
definitely.
Thank you ever so much for joining me. I mean, if our listeners wanted to find you online, whereabouts could they find you?
I mean, you can find Emilias Pasta on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook. EMILIAS PASTA. So you can find us across all socials. If you love the world of pasta, basically.
Nice, thank you. And just where did the name come from, just out of curiosity?
So it's an interesting one. I mean, half of the name is actually a personal secret, so I don't share that with anybody. But the other half, so it's sort of a double-edged name, basically. But the other half comes from the Emilia-Romagna region in Italy, which is the center of food in Italy. And Emilia-Romagna is the region where you have Modena, Parma, Parmigiano Reggiano. So it's basically all balsamic vinegar. It's all your sort of, I guess it's a very fertile part of the country in terms of both agriculture and food and drink in general. So yeah, I think historically it was also previously one of the centers of food in Europe. Before you had the maps of France and Italy and stuff like that, it was considered to be one of the best places for food, basically. So,
and with DOP status as well, hey?
So DOP basically is a denomination of origin, a protected denomination of origin, basically, and it relates to certain suppliers and products, and you have a lot of suppliers and products in that area who have certified products, basically. But it doesn't mean all of them do. It's just something to note.
No, thank you very much. Well, Andrew, thank you very much for joining us. And I look forward to chatting to you again at some stage.
Yeah, thank you for having me. And really, really interesting to discuss just general mental health and what we can do to tackle it. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. Cheers. Speak soon. Thanks again for listening to another episode of the Burnt Chef Journal. If you haven't yet checked out the Burnt Chef Project website, then please head over to www.theburntchefproject.com. You'll find a whole host of resources, free access to our training app, as well as free support services, blog posts, our merchandise store, and also our ambassadors who are there to support you when you need it. Thanks again for joining us this week, and I'll see you again soon.